All right, so we have Jordan from The Limiting Factor, one of the greatest YouTube channels on the internet, and he covers in very deep detail the technology behind batteries, the technology behind electric vehicles. And for somebody that follows electric vehicles, Tesla, so on and so forth, this is going to be a very interesting podcast because Tesla just so it seems like they've just had a breakthrough, and this is why we have Jordan with their 4680, their in-house battery manufacturing process that is now utilizing a dry battery electrode. They, I believe, manufactured the very first Alpha truck or the Release Canada truck that will have this technology, and this has a lot of implications long term, not just for Tesla but just batteries in general, for the long-term adoption of electric vehicles, how much they're going to cost, how powerful they're going to be, how much energy density there's going to be, the curve in the technology, and how much better it's going to get over time. And so that's why we have our super awesome friend Jordan here to get real nerdy. So please nerd out for us, Jordan. Where would you like to start with this wonderful topic?
I would say what the significance of it is. So we can just work through that. I would say the first thing that's the significance here for the bean counters and the people are the first thing that jumps out at people is this is going to reduce the cost of the battery cells that Tesla uses in their vehicles. I would say currently the average, I think it's the global weighted average cell price is about $80 per kilowatt hour. And Tesla for the 4680s with this wet coated generation, I guess you'd call it generation 2 4680 that's going into the Cybertruck, it's probably costing them like $100 an hour at the cell level because they're having to import cathode material. Now, with this new dry coated battery cell, that's going to probably reduce the cell cost down to like $70 per kilowatt hour, I would say. And that's based on Elon's advice in the past and conversations I've had with other people. Now, deeper into the future, when they vertically integrate more with cathode production and lithium production, they can probably get it down to maybe $50 or $60 per kilowatt hour. But for specifically looking at the Cybertruck, you're looking at when they get this spooled up, a savings of like $3,000 to $4,000 for each of those battery packs that go into the Cybertruck.
And so this is something they've been working at for a long time, right? Is this was a sort of a thing that people were expecting for it to come to fruition back almost as far back as like 2021 after Battery Day, right? And it's taken them a long time to get here, well after what they originally expected. So what can you tell us what the hell, like what happened? Like why did it take so long?
That's starting to come out now. It was the cathode side of things because they solved the anode and they've been manufacturing dry anode for quite a while now. But the material that they use to coat the cathode foils with is harder. It's like a hard ceramic material that's in a powder, and that was denting the rollers. And that's the last information we have, at least from Tesla. And then Joe Tegmeyer released an image today showing that these rollers, like I wonder if I can bring up an image of this. What we're looking at here is one of the rollers that's used to compress the dry electrode material into like a film or compress it onto the electrode foil. It's this is what's used to basically coat it. So you run a dough through these rollers, the reason why, so it's a powder, but then there's some like polymer material in it, and that kind of turns it into a dough. And then you use these rollers to squash it down. Now, Tesla was saying that material was denting these rollers because it was so hard. Well, what we see here, it doesn't really look dented, but it could have been sort of like micro dents that occur at the microscopic level. But I got this image from Joe Tegmeyer about a week ago. So I've been researching away, figuring what the heck is going on here. What is this roller made of? And why is this, it looks like material is delaminating off of it. So that the shiny stuff is a chrome coating on top of that roller. And the reason why you have that chrome coating on there is to make an ultra smooth electrode. So because you're compressing these things so much, whatever you're compressing it with, the electrode is going to take on the characteristics of whatever surface finish that has. So this is the chrome provides a super even, super smooth surface finish on that electrode material when it compresses it. Now, what's behind that? When I saw that, it looked like some sort of ceramic material. What's going on here? And I talked to the experts, and they said, actually, usually these rollers are made of aluminum or stainless steel that's been thermally hardened. But this doesn't look like that. What it looks like it's happened here is they've actually nitrided this roller. Nitriting means infusing the surface of that roller material with nitrogen, and that hardens it up. So what I think, but what happens when you nitride the surface of something? It doesn't have as good adhesion. So what I think has happened here is Tesla tried to solve the denting problem by making the roller harder. And when they made the roller harder, it created this subsequent issue where that chrome material is delaminating off the roller as it's trying to roll the material. That's what I think has happened here. Pure speculation. Either way, whether this is the denting issue or whether it's a delamination issue from nitriding, what this shows us is what Tesla was dealing with. The rollers just could not take the pressures of compressing that cathode material. But we had an update like about a month ago, or in the past few weeks. What's happened now is Tesla has, according to the reports from a couple of different places, they've upgraded the equipment. And now that they've upgraded the equipment, that's solved this problem. And now they can roll out that cathode material. But why did that take so long? Because that equipment upgrade, the technology may not have been quite there yet, and Tesla didn't want to do the capital outlay. Those are two potential reasons for me. And I think a third reason is, of course, they wanted to make sure that it couldn't be done with their existing equipment. Let's try all the workarounds we can. Let's try adjusting the feed rates, the temperatures, etc. And I think they ran out of options and finally said, okay, there's a supplier here that has the equipment now to solve this problem. Let's upgrade the equipment. And that seems to have solved the issue based on the reports I've seen.
I had heard something about, there was a decision that was made by the team when Drew was still there to kind of take one fork in the road and go one direction. And it was actually going back and revisiting that decision and going down the other fork in the road that was able to kind of get them through this. What was that decision that was made in the past, and what change did they make, and how does that play into this?
Well, it sounds like it was like they were trying workarounds, and it sounded like Elon has said in the past that one of the mistakes engineers make is to optimize something that doesn't need to be optimized. And I don't think that's exactly what's happened here, but it sounds like they were trying to work around and like, hey, we think we can do this with the existing equipment we have with workarounds. And then it sounds like eventually Elon stepped in and said, all right, no, let's take this other path. Let's just buy the new equipment and see if it solves the problem. That's the reports weren't extremely clear on what happened there, but as far as I could tell from the reports, that's what happened, is workarounds versus just getting new equipment and making the investment to make it work.
And so now that they have this new equipment, are they still going to have to solve a lot of the, both line speed and yield problems that come like, because it sounds to me like they haven't even really started to fully debug, if you will, all of the issues that come along with the cathode production. They probably have done that with the anode production, but I would imagine that the types of specific issues that you run into trying to do dry coating with cathode are going to be at least somewhat unique, and that whatever those problems are that are unique to cathode and not anode, we don't really even know what they are. And so what's your expectation for Tesla's ability to ramp up their dry cathode production to meet their dry anode production in the, say, next 18 months?
I think it's going to be like with the vehicle ramps, where it's just slow and incremental. And then there's like, once they solve a certain number of issues, then it's going to go exponential, and then it's going to taper off. But their suppliers have confirmed that. They've said, yeah, the anode and the cathode are very different problems, and they require slightly different settings and slightly different equipment. Now, what's good is because Tesla has been chipping away at this for several years, they probably have a very good understanding of all the issues that can arise. So they have this wealth of experience that can draw from now. And although I do expect there to be hiccups while they ramp it, it seems like their view is fundamentally that they have the problem solved. Because I forget what the word is for it, but the way materials flow and the way that they move and how you leverage that to coat something, there's the material science behind that. And then there's the material science of the roller itself. And it sounds like they've solved the material science issue of the roller itself. And now that they have that, and they have this wealth of experience on the how that material flows and moves, I think now that they have both of those, they're ready to ramp it hard. But we'll see. We've been surprised and shocked before. I'm not holding my breath. I'm happy to see that they feel like they've solved it well enough that they're going to commit to it and start volume production of these battery packs. Beyond that, I'm going to take it one quarter at a time and see how we go.
And since the equipment that we have that's new now that they're ordering, before, were they using the same exact equipment for anode and cathode?
Previously, they were definitely using different settings, is all I know. I'm assuming that they were using the same or similar equipment.
Well, the reason that I ask is, so, we have whatever this equipment is that we have, and now we're having to buy some new equipment. All of the existing equipment that they have, can that be repurposed to just run more anode lines to where we could basically just add whatever the new machines are, we can double them up and have cathode production, but we haven't wasted, we can still use all of the equipment that we have so far to continue to grow overall production.
I would assume so, but that assumption isn't based on anything other than a guess. So yeah, I can't really say on that. That's a question that's beyond me. There's been no real reports out there.
How big of a breakthrough is this that they just solved?
LG Chem wants to do it. They've just started their pilot line, and there's a lot of, okay, put it this way. Every company is working on this. It sounds like the subsequent company that's actually going to get to scale on it is probably going to be LG Chem, and they're not planning on getting that to scale until 2028. There's a lot of companies with pilot lines, and a lot of those companies are saying, hey, we're solved. Unlike Tesla, we have this solved, and they're still at pilot stage. Well, remember when Tesla was at pilot stage, they were saying they had it solved. So whenever somebody comes to me claiming that they have the dry electrode solved at the pilot stage, it's like, well, that's not where the issues really arose for Tesla. It was at the mass manufacturing stage. So I always take it with a grain of salt. I think I know of probably at least 3 to 5 companies that are working on this, but I'm assuming that's confirmed. But I'm assuming everybody is working on it because it's a fundamentally cheaper way to manufacture a battery cell. And Tesla has just gotten a step ahead of everybody else, basically. Manufacturers like CATL and LG Chem that are doing huge volumes of battery cells, they're going to still have the benefit of manufacturing at scale. They do produce so much more batteries than Tesla that they can still compete on cost. But eventually, as Tesla scales this, there's going to be no way to compete with this in terms of cost. Everybody has to move to this if they want to be competitive in the long term.
And so one of the things that I remember we talked about, maybe it was a couple years ago, it's been a minute, but one of the things you were projecting, at least at the time, was that there was going to be a significant shortage of battery and battery material sometime mid-decade that would impact manufacturers very heavily. Has this changed that equation? Are there other variables that are sort of in play that have dramatically changed what mid-decade into late decade looks like? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Excellent question. Really good question. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm glad I have a chance to address this. So there's 2 sides to this. One is the supply and the other is demand. The supply picture is pretty much as I expected it to be. What's changed is Tesla isn't growing at 50% per year anymore. And because of the fact that Tesla isn't going to be producing as many vehicles, well, that eliminates the supply problem. So it's basically a couple of years where Tesla's growth is kind of flat for EVs. And if you plot that out exponentially, 50% growth per year, it basically puts the production volumes for Tesla that we were expecting in 2027, 2028 to 2030 and beyond. So I don't see supply being an issue. In fact, in the analysis that I did, I said I expected a glut of lithium around 2024, 2025, and that's actually turned out to be the case. There's a glut in battery and lithium supply, just because of the ebbs and flows of, mining and refining and things like that. But also, unexpectedly, EV growth hasn't been as strong. So it's been a confluence of two things that have absolutely cratered the cost of battery cells down to like $50 per kilowatt hour and made an abundant supply of battery cells for companies like Tesla, who is able to take it to use those battery cells.
How does the growth of all of the Chinese EV auto manufacturers play into all that? Because while obviously, here in the United States, all the legacies are pulling back on their plans and they're not growing as quickly, it seems like the growth in EVs in China are actually kind of ahead of the growth of EVs here in the United States. So, does that put more pressure on us again in the back half of the decade, or is it just not quite enough? Or, I guess what's the relative quantity compared to what Tesla's plans were and what Chinese companies seem to be on track for?
I'd have to go back and revisit my assumptions. I mainly focused on what Tesla's growth rate plans were. But I think, what I did was I gave a couple of assumptions. One was that Tesla took something like 20% of the market. Another one of my situations with Tesla took 40% of total global market share. So I think I dealt with the Chinese question like that by looking at, what proportion of the market that Tesla takes. And what that actually didn't have too much of an impact. I think what that does is it shifted Tesla's or the total materials bottleneck globally from like 2026 to 2028, depending on how hard Tesla and the Chinese ramp. So my assumption is due to Tesla's slowdown, and I think the Chinese market has slowed down as well. They're still growing faster than they are in the United States, but they're not growing at like 50% a year from memory. There was a couple of years there where they almost doubled their EV production, but that's not happening anymore. So I just don't see material supply being an issue this decade. There might be little patches here where they play whack-a-mole and there might be a shortage of this material or that temporarily, but overall, there's been a whole lot of investment that occurred in the early part of this decade, and now it's sort of overinvested, and there's a lot of latent capacity there. A lot of these manufacturers just are only using only a fraction of the capacity of their factories.
And I know this is another thing you wanted to talk about. So, and I think this might be a good sort of place to ask the question: how much of this dynamic of cratering battery prices because of less demand and way more supply, plus breakthroughs in the dry battery cathode process and just a battery process that's going to dramatically lower the cost in the long term, where Tesla has had a breakthrough, how much of that is influencing Tesla's decision to move up their affordable car using their existing lines, because the biggest percentage of costs of the car has now plummeted?
I don't think the battery prices influence that. I think we had battery cells that were cheap enough, say this year or the year before, in order to do that. What interested me in talking about the affordable car was I think people are underhyping it. I think because Tesla said that we don't expect this to use a full unboxed process, that people think this is going to be a much more expensive vehicle than they initially thought, which was like a $25,000 vehicle. Tesla could make like a modified version of the Model 3 or the Model Y, but I don't see that driving costs down enough for them to get another incremental million units per year. I think they have to produce a relatively cheap car in order to be able to sell another million vehicles per year. So how cheap can we expect that affordable vehicle to be? And this is where my thinking was. At Investor Day, Tesla said they wanted to reduce the cost of a vehicle by 50%, cut it in half. But only 13.5% or thereabouts, 13 or 14% of that, if you count the pixels in the bar chart, was due to the unboxed process. So let's say you're getting 36% of that 50% cost reduction just by reducing the size of the vehicle, making the powertrain smaller. Let's call that 33% less, a third less cost. So if Tesla's cost of goods sold right now is $36,000 and you reduce that by a third, you're looking at a $24,000 production cost for that vehicle. And you just add some of the benefits of the unboxed process, not the full 13.5%, and take into account that 36% or $36,000 cost of goods sold is for all vehicles, even the more expensive ones. I think we're going to be seeing Tesla producing a vehicle that's maybe a $22,000 or a $23,000 cost of goods sold. Add $5,000 to that, for example, and I think we're looking at an affordable vehicle in the range of like $27,000 to $28,000. And they're going to be producing that in factories that are already in place with established supply chains with veteran employees. So I think it's going to ramp fast and it's going to be cheap. And I think it's going to hit a lot harder and have more of an impact than people think.
It sounds to me like you're assuming that these interim vehicles are going to be smaller vehicles than anything that we offer currently?
Yeah, I think at least one of them is going to be. If we want to hit those, as I said, if you want to produce another 1 million vehicles per year out of those same factory and sell those vehicles, I think you can't just cut the cost by $2,000 or $3,000, which is, I think that's about all the cost you can take out of the Model 3 or the Model Y. I think you actually need to produce a very different vehicle rather than just a modification of what they already produce.
And do you think that they are going to employ both front and rear gigacastings? Because that's one of the things that, honestly surprised me a little bit with the Highland Model 3 is that we're still using the entire, body in white is a stamped and welded frame.
Well, it depends on which factory they're going to pull these out of. And it makes sense to me that they're still using like a stamped and welded body in white because I kind of look at vehicle manufacturing lines as money printers. And if there's no reason to shut that line down, then you shouldn't do it. There's got to be a really good reason. You have to, because if you change from a body in white to a gigacasting, that's going to require a significant amount of downtime. Are you going to recoup that through adding gigacastings? It might be worth it if you plan on implementing new vehicles on that line and to give yourself some flexibility, because those gigacasting machines, you can swap out the head on those things within, I think it's within a few hours. You can just swap out the head on
dies.
it, so you can, the dies, so you can produce different vehicles. So, the cost benefit wasn't there in the past to swap over, but now there might be.
It's interesting. I've been thinking about this a little bit and just trying to wrap my head around it because it seems like maybe there's two independent axes that you have, boxed versus unboxed production. But, you can produce larger, the same size or smaller vehicles with unboxed production. And then there's, okay, hey, we're going to build these mostly on current existing lines. Well, that also could be larger, the same size or smaller. But then the other axis is, hey, is that size larger, the same size or smaller? And so like in my mind, we could be going ahead and going down to that compact vehicle with these interim next, middle of the road, produced on the same lines vehicle. And if that were the case, I would expect them to be, I guess really either way, I would expect any new vehicles probably to utilize castings, because I wouldn't think that you would want to reconfigure the stamping and welding shop to do a new frame that is different than the Model 3 and the Model Y in Fremont. And I think, in fact, even in Austin, the front end of both the 3 and Y are also stamped and welded. They don't use a front gigacasting, or at least they didn't last I knew. Yeah, I would think for new, you would expect those to be castings, correct?
I would expect them to be, and it's not for the reason that you would. Here's my thinking on that. Those stamping lines and welding, that takes up a huge portion of the factory. If you swapped out those stamping lines for a gigapress, you open up more production space for vehicles. So that, to me, that would be the biggest argument. It's not that the gigacasting is better, But the main reason I would want to do that at Fremont was to free up that floor space so you can produce an entirely new vehicle. Yeah. And then I think it's important to note that focusing on the gigacasting is a good point, because the unbox process, it's just something that sort of emerges from a lot of other technologies that Tesla's implementing. So you have the wiring, the gigacastings, the structural battery pack. So you can implement all these other technologies and not do an unboxed process. You can do all these other things and save money on the production of the vehicle, but you don't necessarily have to do it with a parallel manufacturing process. So that's what I think they mean when they're using parts of the unboxed process. I think that they mean the underlying technologies that make the unboxed process possible.
All of this is an interesting discussion because there was a highlight from Omid Afshar, who's one of the executives at Tesla, that after the second quarter update for 2024 earnings update came through, there was a highlight of the earnings that talks directly to your sort of assumption or what you think is an underhyping of what's about to come. And a Tesla executive highlighting this maybe is sort of like, hey, maybe y'all should be paying attention. And so just to sort of read this for the crowd, plans for new vehicles, including more affordable models, remain on track for start of production in the first half of 2025. This is after he said, important highlight from our Q2 2024 update. These vehicles will utilize aspects of the next generation platform as well as aspects of our current platforms and will be able to be produced on the same manufacturing lines as our current vehicle lineup. This approach will result in achieving less cost reduction than previously expected, sort of talking about hey, instead of 50%, might be 33% or 35%, but enables us to prudently grow our vehicle volumes in a more CapEx efficient manner during uncertain times. This should help us fully utilize our current expected maximum capacity of close to 3 million vehicles, which if you look at 2023 sales of 1.8 million, it would add at least another million to sales per year. Enabling more than 50% growth over 2023 production before investing in new manufacturing lines, which implies, right, if I think I'm reading this correctly, that this is not the only time that they're going to combine unbox and not box and not unbox, like regular unbox. Like they might be using this line in multiple ways. And then on top of that, our purpose-built robotaxi product will continue to pursue a revolutionary unbox manufacturing strategy, right? And so it was fascinating seeing Omid highlight this after Elon specifically said on the call, well, we don't want to Osborne ourselves. And then Omid's like, check this out. Let's Osborne, right? So it's fascinating. Go ahead, Hans. So you want to add something?
Well, I was going to say, so this is the place where I think that we've been talking about, I think that we've been talking about this compact next generation vehicle for so long that for most of the community, we're still kind of stuck in the thought process of this next set of vehicles being compact. But, growing from 2 million capacity to 3 million capacity is not that much. Like, I'm expecting compact platform to be way bigger than an incremental 1 million units. So it has me asking the question, are we talking, instead of a smaller car, about potentially a Model Y XL that's more along the lines of like a Toyota Highlander in size instead of a Toyota RAV4 in size, or some other variations on maybe expanding current platforms, or filling in the space between an X and a Y, or even maybe expanding the X, which is a decent size SUV, but it doesn't fill that full size 8-seat potentially SUV. Like there's other holes in the product lineup besides that compact vehicle where I think there is volume to be acquired that's not all the way down there at that compact size, where I do think that, but then the question is, okay, does that make sense with cost reduction? And maybe you do have a lot of cost reduction that you can get through the implementation of steer by wire and doing the ether loop instead of having the old CAN bus and implementing castings and all these things. So I don't know. I'm just really trying to leave these different possibilities open in my mind as we, come into 1010.
The way I think about that statement is when they say including more affordable models, right? It implies more affordable than now. And so my thought process is like, okay, so it goes down from a $35,000 starting price before tax credits or whatever that number is to maybe $30,000 or $28,000, like Jordan was saying, right? And if we're thinking about, hey, our existing line will be fully utilized before new lines, and it will get us 50% growth, it doesn't really mean that they're going to stop there. The way I read it is like, hey, we're going to hit 1 million, and then we'll build more for 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. And then this robotaxi thing, whatever this is, will be on its own thing, which is going to be unboxed. And that one's going to be 20 million a year. I don't freaking know. I mean, that's a crazy number, right? But they're sort of pursuing a whole different thing because, when you think about self-driving vehicles, we've talked about this many times on the channel, it just rewrites and you have to view transportation through a completely different lens. Everything changes. The cabin, safety implications, how the ratio of your hood to your cabin, your hood to your trunk space, right? Just the whole proportions of the car are just completely out the window. And then in a driverless future, how much of the existing line can you truly use in a driverless car? Because those lines are optimized to have a cabin and that is purpose built for steering wheel, pedal, and all the mechanisms that are tied to that, right? So that's how I read that statement. But you could also be correct because, the van has been something. If we look at sort of the vehicles that they were hyping, the van was something. The one slide that they had 2 compact cars with covers on them. I think you're right. But they had two compact cars and like a van shaped one that were undercover. So are those the 3 things they're going to unveil on 1010, which used to be 88? The robotaxi, the cheaper compact car, and then the way they're talking about it is like, hey, by the first half of 2025 we'll have production going, which means June. But if it's a Model Y timeline, because here's another very interesting thing, right? The last time Tesla unveiled and released a car that was based on an existing line, so Model Y, they were 6 months early. People forget that. When the Model Y was first announced and then launched, it came out 6 months ahead of schedule. And part of me thinks is like, this is just me throwing ideas out there, is that how much of that was a purpose, like how much of that was them deliberately trying to throw people off so that they don't Osborne. But like, hey, this thing's coming 6 months later, and then all of a sudden they're like, yo, check this out, it's actually much earlier than you thought. You can buy it now. And something like a cheaper vehicle, one of the things that I've thrown around is like, hey, it's in your best interest to like delay the announcement of this thing as much as possible and get it as close as you can to the actual delivery date of the vehicles, because that gap is going to create such a massive wait time for people that it's going to seriously hurt not only your current sales, but it's also going to piss off a lot of people that have to wait maybe longer than they should to buy what's likely to be their most expensive purchase in their lives that happens to be the most affordable car from Tesla, which also will have the largest amount of demand. So it's like, it makes a lot of sense to delay that. So I wonder how much of that is like, hey, this is first half of 2025, but really it's January, or February. It's not really June. And then if you announce it on 10/10, that's only a 2-month wait, which is not terrible, right? I don't know. This is just what's going through my mind. I don't know if any of this is right or not, but it's sort of similar to the FSC discussion where it doesn't feel real that we're actually getting to a point where these things are coming to fruition, that we've talked about it for so long, and now it might actually happen.
Yeah, it seems unreal because we just haven't seen, exactly as you said. We've been waiting for these things for 5-6 years. Heck, and this is, when you're talking, I was also thinking, okay, so there's this incremental 1 million units per year, and there, as they said, The reason why they're doing that is to be capital efficient. They want to maximize those existing lines. And I don't think they will stop there with 1 million units. They just want to flesh out their existing factories. But on top of that, they also have the ramp of the Tesla Semi. They also have the robo-taxi that they want to spool up. They're also building a mega factory in Shanghai, 40 gigawatt hours and potentially 80 gigawatt hours in the future. So there's a lot of things that they're cooking at the moment. Yeah, the bot. So there's so much that they have coming online in the next year or two.
And not to mention FSD and the progress they're making there.
Speaking of the mega factory, am curious while we have you here, like what level of growth would we need to see out of the Megapack project for that to begin to put pressure on cells for automotive, especially since it seems like it's mostly going to be, lithium iron phosphate cells that go into those.
They're two different supply chains. They're actually the battery cells for Megapacks are actually on average $10 per kilowatt hour cheaper because they're a different form factor. For Megapacks, you're using a much larger cell. For a vehicle, you have to use smaller cells in order to get the voltage high enough. Because if you use like 3 big, for instance, lithium iron phosphate cells in a vehicle, you'd only get to like 10 volts. And you need like 400 volts. So they have to make the battery cells smaller. So there's often an assumption that those battery cells are interchangeable between Megapacks and vehicles, and they aren't. They're different sizes and different designs that are optimized for each use case.
But as far as raw materials, they're still going to be using, mostly the same raw materials. So as far as looking, deeper into like the late 2020s, early 2030s, and the reason that I asked this is because I have the sneaking suspicion that as energy becomes more and more of a national security priority, that we're going to be leaning harder into growing our, energy production capacity. And one of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit out there is, hey, if we could average our production, and instead of having to do this crazy thing where we're matching production and consumption at all the time, that we can basically like double the amount of useful energy that we can get out of all of our existing production, because it's all sized for peak times, which is roughly double what normal would be. So that if we had a sufficient amount of battery cells attached to the grid, we could produce twice as much as we're producing now. And as we're looking at trying to compete with China and grow the amount of energy available for all of these AI, data centers and stuff, that I would think that we're going to do that. And then obviously China's probably going to be in the same situation where they are looking to also dramatically grow the amount of energy storage attached to their grids as well. And so I kind of think that we're at the very beginning of a very large growth curve for Megapacks. And I'm just curious how big that would have to be in order to end up impacting the ability to grow vehicles.
I would have to revisit my assumptions on that. But when I did that 2-hour video on the lithium supply chain, I had very aggressive assumptions. So I think those assumptions were large enough that it could accommodate the potential growth we can expect in grid storage. And that's a really tricky one. The more I look into grid storage and how it evolves, the more I realize that this is really hard to predict because of all the different players, the complexity of all these different grids, and all the potential different options. Predicting how the grid will evolve is almost predicting how politics will evolve because there's so many different variables there. And I've just kind of thrown my hands up, and I've done my best with my grid storage videos, but it's a tricky problem because, as you point out, there's ways we can increase the amount of power generation we have on the grid. But there's already a huge amount of power generation there that's latent most of the time, not doing anything. It's only used during peak power. And there's also our power lines. We can transmit a lot more power over our transmission lines with better monitoring because the choke points is often the places in the grid transmission where things are heating up. And they just kind of take a guess as to where that is. If you're constantly monitoring all those power lines and you can see where the hot spots are forming, you can bump up the total amount of transmission that you're doing on the existing lines without upgrading them. So there's lots of little things like that. And nuclear, how is nuclear going to involve, and how is that going to play into it? So I don't really have the answers there. All I know is it's complex, and I'm doing as much research as I can there. But in terms of material supply, I think we have enough.
Yeah, one of the biggest eye-opening things that I saw from our discussion with Matt Smith, the ugliest person I've ever met. Just I want to make sure that's out there. The amount of projects out there related to energy storage products that are waiting to be fulfilled, even if a small percentage of them, even if a large percentage of them don't come to fruition, it still signifies a gigantic increase of projects year over year. And as the needs around artificial intelligence and power, like power for artificial intelligence projects rise, as the third world enters the second world and the second world enters the first world, so on and so forth, and the needs of the first world countries continue to increase. And there's just so much demand for an improved grid system that the forcing function for energy storage solutions and batteries at the core, this technology, the battery technology, becoming the primary, like the new oil is the freaking battery, is like it's all there. It's all there. And we should look no further than how heavy China is going into it, even in a situation where demand for the systems that require this battery is down. Let's say electric vehicles, they're still growing it, they're still investing heavily into it, because they know that if they can position themselves in a place where they can corner as much of the raw materials and even the batteries as much as they can, they control a lot of, and they get to dictate a lot of how transportation and energy systems will pan out in the future, which, you know, when we spoke with Michael Dunn, who is somebody that visited Asian countries very often with the intention of learning about what they're doing from a vehicle perspective, energy perspective, battery perspective, so on and so forth, it's becoming, and Hans talked about it briefly here, it's becoming a matter of national security for countries to secure as much of this as they can. And with the United States and Tesla specifically, you have the ability to do that. You just have to make sure the support's there for the company to actually be successful long term, or not even that, because of the economics of it make too much sense for people to pass up. So maybe that's like the ultimate thing that gets this thing to be adopted. It's just the economics are too good. So
yeah, and I was just looking at my my battery supply forecast, and I was assuming that there's like 6 terawatt hours of battery supply, and I assumed like a 1 terawatt hour shortfall. So I think we're at like a little over 1 terawatt hour of global battery supply right now. So that would have to be a 6x in the next like 6 years. So I don't think that's going to happen at this point. But we will see how things emerge, because things are changing so fast. Just like in the past year, I've had to completely change my perspective on Tesla's lithium supply issue because they've changed their demand. We don't know how things are going to be a year from now. So it could change in the next year or two. If I could pick one time to be alive in human history, this would be it. There's so much cool stuff happening right now, especially with Elon. Okay, so we only covered cost as like the primary advantage of this dry cathode. The other thing is scalability. The main thing that Tesla said at Investor Day, and they said this a few times before and during Investor Day, or not Investor Day, Battery Day, was this allows us to be the masters of our own destiny. They don't have to dick around with suppliers. If they want batteries, they can just produce them, and they can ramp much faster than they could in-house versus using an external supplier. And then also, so the third reason why this is important, and this goes back to the masters of their own destiny thing, is the huge global reliance on on China's supply chain. It looks like, besides China, the only other entity in the world that's going to have its own vertically integrated supply chain would be Tesla. So if there is some sort of geopolitical issue with China, Tesla's going to be the only company that can produce batteries and produce electric vehicles. So this is why Elon was saying at the annual meeting that the importance of this will become apparent over time. Tesla will be independent of China's supply chain if they continue down this path.
The urgency around that from, let's say, other players that are building vehicles, the lack of urgency is shocking to me. It really is shocking. And the more I have conversations about this, for people to follow the Tesla story closely, the one hypothesis that we've all had for a really long time is that legacy automakers are in a world of hurt because as electric vehicles become adopted over time, and the technologies and the materials necessary to make an electric vehicle go down in price, it becomes a no-brainer transition. Yet it looks so obvious. It looks so painfully clear, and we're seeing the opposite happening by a lot of these. They're pulling back. They're saying, "No, we're good. Y'all can have it. We'll figure out how to make this thing work without it, and then y'all can have it." Right, to the point where it's like, I don't think anybody can. I mean, it's probably a lot more esoteric than I'm giving it credit for, but it's just becoming so obvious, so painfully obvious that so many players are so far behind this. They're just dropped the ball on this massively, and yeah. I don't want to preach to the choir too much because
now's the time to put the pressure on. There's a little bit of a lull, and Tesla's still pushing forward, and everybody else is pulling back. And when this starts, when we get to the next leg of this. All these companies are going to be as far behind as they ever were.
They should be going crazy now. Exactly. They should be going crazy. Like, this is the time to go crazy.
The only company that I see that's doing that, Jim Farley, is making all the right noises in terms of his focus on the wiring system and the software. That's where it's all at. That's what makes the unboxed process truly possible. And that's what makes a fully connected next generation vehicle that's like an entertainment platform possible. Those two things, wiring and software.
The frustrating thing with Farley, though, is like he's been saying the right things for a while. It's just their execution has not been there. If you look at their success, if you look at how much they're losing per car, it's like hopefully they can turn it around. But man,
well, to me, it's they're learning the right lessons from what they're doing, and they're pouring all this into their skunk works. I don't know if you've heard him talk about this before, but it's something that they started on a couple years ago, and it's not going to be revealed for another year or two. Now, whether that's going to happen soon enough to save the company is a different story, but they are investing in the right areas.
I'll come back to that in just a second, but I was going to say on the independent supply chain side of things for Tesla, it also ties in with the conversation that we were having with Michael Dunn about just leverage, and Tesla being very aware and adept at using leverage in negotiations with the Chinese Communist Party to do things that, having that independent supply chain means that there's one less way for the CCP to twist Tesla's arm in future negotiations, and that they don't have a way to, prevent Elon from moving forward with his plans because he has that one, critical bottleneck that he's held up by. But then coming back to Jim Farley and Ford, like, do you think that they have learned enough and that there's a good path forward for them with whatever this skunkworks vehicle is? Like, how soon does it need to come out, and how great does it have to be in order to provide them a leg to stand on moving forward?
I don't know what position they're in with regards to bankruptcy, so I haven't looked at their financials, but in terms of, they are saying the right things. They're talking about moving 2 or 3 step. They're basically following Tesla's playbook and integrating their engineers into the supply chain. So they have people working at other factories, helping design these electronics, etc., and moving to what it sounds like to me more like a zonal architecture where the controllers can do more, and it gives you more control over the vehicle itself. And that requires not just hardware, but also you have to be helping program the software as well. So they're reaching deeper into the supply chains, vertically integrating.
Well, and given that they're focused on, those electronics components and software and networking, what do you think the likelihood is that they are one of those OEMs that is in discussion with Tesla to license FSD? Because Ford's, Jim has been talking about their ambitions to do this themselves.
I think they're the highest likelihood company, and that's a really good point. It's something I've been thinking about every time I hear Jim Farley repeating something that Elon said a couple of years ago. It's like, oh, okay, you're learning from the best, you're learning from the master, and Jim is thankfully humble enough to do that. And I do think that, I mean, if you look at all these other companies, I don't see why any company, if Tesla comes out ahead with full self-driving, why anybody would use anybody's software but Tesla. Because if you use somebody else's software, there's going to be a higher likelihood of people dying because they have less data, less compute, and all this other stuff. So it's a safety thing. And I think the way Tesla is going to get around the monopoly concerns is I think they're going to be fair and open, and I wouldn't say they're going to open source it like they have with their patents, but they have to take a similar approach because they're going to be earning so many profits and have such a stranglehold on the market that they have to keep the pressure from regulators and stuff off of them. But I think, yeah, I do think Ford is positioning themselves and following Tesla's lead with their architecture so they can adopt Tesla's full self-driving. But Ford aside, I don't see why anybody would use any other system because, I mean, it's people's lives. It's safety.
And it's obviously getting done, especially with the recent improvements with 12.5.1.2 that's being tested right now by Tesla. It's becoming increasingly obvious that it's going to happen. Like there's the limiting factor is no longer there, which was how much compute hardware you needed, right? And I think another thing we want to talk about was compute, training compute versus inference compute, if you still want to. But I think the one thing that also became apparent with Michael Dunn was when we had him on the podcast was that Chinese automakers are not afraid to borrow or copy, or whatever word you want to use, the winning technology, right? They seem to operate with a lot less ego, or let's say they have a hand that's forcing their what they need to do, that will potentially land them in a situation where they could craft a vision-only solution that sort of sheds a lot of the burden that comes from having a Waymo-like system of LiDAR, ultrasonics, HD maps, so on and so forth, that makes it very costly to create a self-driving car, plus extremely difficult to scale, right? Just today, it was announced that BYD is partnering with Uber to provide 100,000 self-driving vehicles for Uber to operate in their fleet, right? And then Elon replied to that, and he's like, BYD needs to change their strategy or they're toast. And I think what he was sort of insinuating there is like, hey, if y'all don't adopt vision plus inference compute, aka license from me, because it's going to be very expensive for you to do what I'm doing, you're screwed, right? But I do wonder how many Chinese players will adopt FSD versus like a Ford or so on and so forth. Because I think it's more, and I think Hans, you may have brought this up last time we spoke, or one of the times we spoke, is I'm warming up to the idea that it's more likely for a Chinese automaker to adopt FSD before a legacy automaker does, like a European or American one, because they don't have that ego, or that, no, we got it, or it's not that important. Like, there's too much risk here. It's like, no, we should probably adopt this, because if we don't, we're become obsolete, because why would anybody want to buy a car you have to drive yourself when you can just buy a car that drives itself?
Yeah, the president of Xiaopeng has come over to the US and he's driven a Tesla, and they've even got some like Xiaopeng branded content where he's reacting to the two different systems. And I think it was Herbert who was saying that this feels to him like they're warming up the possibility of Xiaopeng licensing FSD from Tesla. And I think that is one possibility. I'm sure that if not Xiaopeng, then another one of the companies in China would love to do that. Like, there's going to definitely be at least one, if not multiples, in China that would, if Tesla would allow them to. But I think that raises a very legitimate question in my mind of whether or not that is something that Elon should be open to. Like, I don't particularly think that it would be wise to open up Well, I don't know. Like I have competing sets of thoughts on this. On the one hand, I think from a safety perspective that that would be a win for humanity. On the other hand, I think that we need to maintain some life in the United States auto manufacturing world. And I personally think I would prioritize doing deals with Western automakers first, and then maybe not, say no to China forever, but maybe holding them off for a little while until we can make sure that we've got a little bit of an edge there just from a technology standpoint. Because they're obviously going to be, trying to copy the approach regardless of whether they license it right away. And I think that they'll have all the resources at their disposal to be probably the fastest, set of entities to reproduce what Tesla has done, from scratch.
There's a discussion online at the moment about whether Hardware 3 will be able to make it all the way. So, and we kind of touched on this a little bit before, or depending on how you cut this, it could be in the future. We don't know what Hardware 3 can do yet because it's completely dependent on the compute that's used in training. That's because the way that the way that we were talking about, the way that I learn something, for instance, is I gather as much information as possible. The more information I have, the more weight that I can place on certain parts of that information. And the more information you get, the clearer those weights become, and the more compute you have, the smarter you are, the faster you can get there. And then once you've refined that as to, okay, these are the key pieces of information, then you can hand that off. Like, say, if you're a human, you teach it to somebody. And some people, like if they hand a piece of information off to you, like for instance, a professor, they can explain something to you in 5 minutes and you can get it instantly. Whereas another professor, they can spend an hour explaining to you and you don't know what the heck they're talking about. And it's the same thing compressing this information with the training and putting it into the inference compute. The more data you throw at it and the more compute you throw at it, the more clear what's important becomes, and it gets super distilled and refined. So, people are looking at the inference compute independently without looking at the fact that there's an inverse relationship with the training compute. The more training that you have, the more compressed you can make reality when you put it into that inference compute.
If you only have a little bit of training compute, then you need a lot more hardware at inference time in order to accomplish the same thing too.
Yeah, and so I think this discussion is premature. I don't think we really know what Hardware 3 can do until we get these multiple super training clusters online. So I guess at minimum, I don't expect to see any changes in the hardware for the next year or two. If there's an upgrade necessary, I think we're going to see that in the future. And it's worth Tesla's time to spend a little bit of extra energy on the software side, refining things, even without the additional training compute, to cater to Hardware 3. Because it seems like some people are saying that we're just going to have several million vehicles on the road now that can't do anything. They can't do full self-driving. And that can be solved with geofencing. It can be solved with upgrading the hardware. It can be solved with the improvements to the supercluster training. It can be solved with refining the compression that they use before they put it into the vehicle.
And so to put you down on the record, what you're saying is that Hardware 3 cars in some way, shape, or form will be able to be added to the robotaxi network where the car can generate income for the owner as a self-driving taxi.
Yes, and there's one more option there. What I think ultimately the difference between these different hardwares is going to be is that, Hardware 3 and Hardware 4, maybe Hardware 4 can do 3 or 4% more of the routes. And what you might do is just certain vehicles, you're going to match that vehicle to the route that it can do. So there might be some routes that Hardware 3 can't do, and then you're geofence those, but most of them it will be able to do. And the way that you'll divide that up, it's kind of like matching drivers to routes with Uber. You're going to match the car to the route. That's one way they could deal with it. I don't see any reason why they couldn't use these Hardware 3 vehicles in some shape or form. I think the last option in terms of capital efficiency will be to upgrade the hardware in all of them. But if that's the worst case scenario, putting like another $500 or $1,000 chip in all these vehicles, that's no big deal considering they're going to be making tens of thousands a year on each one of those vehicles. So I think from top to bottom, it's an issue that's completely overblown. There's dozens of ways they can tackle that and deal with it.
Yeah, I think where I come from is that the clarity of that outcome is still it's still a blurry thing. And so if I'm a hardware 3 person, like I own a hardware 3 car, and I'm kind of in limbo right now because we don't have an explicit yes from the company that says your car will be added to the robotaxi network. So now I'm like, okay, do I upgrade? Do I keep my car? If I can't do it, okay, as an investor, what does that do to the many people that have bought hardware 3 cars with the assumption that they'll be able to do that? How much noise? And honestly, like people that will be upset by that, for every right to be upset about it, if Tesla doesn't have a remedy for it, what is that going to do to the perception of the company, so on and so forth? But I agree ultimately, and I'll throw it to you, Hans, that the economic forcing function is so strong. It makes no sense for Tesla to not ensure that these hardware 3 cars can't drive themselves as robotaxis, because they're leaving so much money on the table if they were to do that, right? And in a worst case scenario, let's say that's not even possible, you still have supervised and potentially unsupervised full self-driving in cars that are 8 years old that will be so much more capable than brand new cars from today or in 2 years' time from anybody else. So, but it's still, it's like, as a Tesla owner, as somebody who follows the story, like I wish we had like a explicit, yes, they'll be able to drive themselves, and if the current hardware can't do it, we'll take care of you kind of thing. And the fact that we're not getting that, the more I think about it, it's like, well, of course, because if he says yes, then you remove another reason for people to upgrade to the cars they have now, because they got to run those factories, baby.
Yeah, I personally welcome anyone who can't think clearly enough about how this is going to work, feeling the FOMO necessary to go buy themselves a hardware 4 vehicle.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at. But I think ultimately the most exciting part of this whole thing is, like, even with Elon replying to my post about, hey, hardware 3 will get the 12.5 tree in about 10 days time, which last time he gave a 10-day sort of like estimation was like a 6-month wait. So like 2 weeks is like a 4x sort of factor. The 10 days is like a 20x. I'm just making a joke, but it actually happened. So hopefully that happens. And if that's the case, then that will put me at ease, because I said, okay, like, yeah, there is a path to get here. And what you guys talked about too is like, they're still going to more than double their training compute by the end of the year. And they're going to continue growing their training compute into next year too. So in theory, as they work through that problem and they identify all the parameters that they really should be focusing on, and they iron out their processes to get the inference compute to be as to really make the code as efficient as possible to run on the inference compute, let's say, then by then they might be at one intervention every 50,000 miles, and if that's the case, you're already better than a Waymo. So put that sucker in a robotaxi network and move on. There was a graph I saw. I think the current version of 12.5 right now is already at like 500 to 600 miles between interventions, based on this sort of crowdsourced data, which is already like 4 to 5 times better than the previous version of, I think, 12.4.3, I think it was, or something like that. So it's starting to hockey stick a little bit, which is encouraging to see. And there was nothing that changed. The only thing they did is add more compute, add more data, which is sort of the hypothesis behind this thing. Like, you've now offloaded to the AI, and you just add compute, add data, add compute, add data. Refine your process, find the right parameters. But that's just the overarching, like, now there is a brute force way of solving truly self-driving vehicles that are at a fraction of the cost of competing products.
Correct. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. And this is like, there was a lot of discussions about this a few months ago. And, like, if you look at all the research papers on this, throwing more data, throwing more compute, refining the algorithms, all these little things, it's like a quadruple exponential. That's probably a technical term that people are going to make fun of me for, but there's like 4 exponentials stacked on top of each other. And we know that if you increase your compute by 10x, your performance improves by 10x. And the same thing with data, and the same thing with every aspect of this. So that now we're watching that play out. It looks like we're at the beginning of watching that play out. Now that Tesla has solved the fundamental architectural problem, it's a lot about brute force. And as Elon said, picking which model is the best, because these things are kind of random the way that they work, and we don't really understand how they work. So it's a matter of like calling in a selection process to find out which one works the best. Hans, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know this stuff better than I do.
Yeah, no, I mean that's an accurate description, and if it's, I think Farzad and I have had this discussion at least once, and then I've had it with Herbert as well, that there's a number of things that you can do to improve the performance of a neural net. You can train with the same compute for a longer amount of time. You can get more clear about exactly what success looks like. You can train with more compute for the same amount of time. You can train with better data. Like, all four of those things are things that you can do that produces a model that is a better model that fits in the exact same size. And then the other thing that you can do to get a better model is you increase the size of the model. And so that's what they're doing right now with this hardware 4 model, or this model that is rolling out first to hardware. It is a hardware 3 model. It's just rolling out to hardware 4 first, because it's easier to run on the hardware 4 while the hardware 4 is emulating hardware 3, because there's some extra space in the computer for it to do some things, that they're having to do some further refinements to get it to fit back on hardware 3. And they'll do that. So that's the, like Farzad said, if we actually get it in 10 days, then this is going to be like a giant, community kerfuffle over literally a few days worth of delay. But if you understand the dynamics that are at play, I don't think there's a lot of room for major worry over the long term here. That there's, we're already going to get more compute. We always have more time that we can spend on training a model. We're definitely always getting more data. So like just those 3 things right there tell me that they can probably go back to the original size of numbers of parameters that's on 12.3 within a few months from now, and get a model that still performs even better than 12.5 does today. And so, I'm not incredibly worried about this. I know that other people would disagree, but it just seems like all of that is premature. Like, people need to just watch and wait.
Yeah, I think it's the uncertainty that's killing people, and I think that's why Farzad makes such a great point. If they just provided some sort of reassurance to people, I mean, but when I look at it from like an engineering lens, it's like there's so many solutions. There's so many ways they can solve this, and I don't see them just having all these millions of cars on the road that are just duds. It's easily solvable. It's just which way are they going to do it? And they're going to pick the most capital efficient way to do that. And the reason why they may not have given certainty yet is because they themselves are still debating about the most capital efficient way to solve that, if it even is an issue. And they might not even know if it's an issue because it's emerging so quickly. I mean, they've only been doing these end-to-end neural nets for like a year now. This is fresh technology. This is all new. So they may not know how it's going to evolve.
Yeah. And then the other thing is just being engineers. Like, do you want to guarantee this is what we're going to do, a year from now or 18 months from now, when you still don't already know? That's why people don't like engineers.
Yeah, you don't want to lock yourself into a solution this early when there's so many possibilities still.
Oh, by the way, if you're still on here, check out this very spicy topic that is now going to come. Beep.
So I think one of the things you're going to bring up is Elon's political commentary, something you were thinking about bringing up. And I think this is relevant because and this is one of those things that just emerged today as I was grinding away on Twitter and thinking about things, is it that Elon is too political, or that other CEOs and other public figures aren't political enough and aren't sharing their opinions enough. I think the only reason it sticks out is because we've become so accustomed to these starchy, boring CEOs that hold their cards close to their chest, which I don't like. I'm sick of. It's a lie. Nobody is that perfect and that ordered. Everybody has flaws. Everybody has different dimensions to themselves. And I think when we expect people in public figures to be perfect, you're automatically attracting sociopaths and people that the kind of people that you don't want running companies and the kind of people you don't want in power. People who are overly concerned what people think about them rather than pursuing the truth.
I agree with you 100%. I think the interesting thing about this sort of Elon getting political on X, and I have a post actually that I want to bring up now that you brought it up, Jordan. Thank you very much. I have actually something that I want to bring up because it kind of like helped me frame this in a different way that I wasn't maybe thinking about from that perspective, but I still think it lands me where I've been thinking, like where I was originally going with my thought process. But I'm going to bring it up because I think it's interesting. I think being punished by allowing yourself to let the people see you for who you are is like peak current sort of political place that we're at now. Is like the folks that are vulnerable and are willing to show their imperfections and are like, hey, these are my cards. I think PBD, I don't know if you guys follow PBD, Patrick Bet David, but he said it in a very interesting way. It's like he put out his cards out there and he's like, yo, this is who I am. Take it or leave it. And as the CEO of a public company, that is the riskiest thing that anybody could have done based on the, let's say, the old school type of thinking, because the thought process is you will not be able to survive the PR disaster and it's going to destroy the profits of the company and you're going to put your shareholders in peril. And as long as you don't have a person that's willing to almost like embrace the fire that comes with it and sort of get himself into or her in a position where it's like, okay, but this is who I am. Let's say this is who I am. I'm unafraid of who I am. Take it or leave it. I am who I am. And here's what I'm doing that is backing up the morals that I have as a person and why I think they're good for society, right? And the piece that gets lost from that equation is like, okay, will you isolate certain people? 1,000%. And that's what I kind of want to bring up with that post that I was talking about, 1,000%. But the equation that gets lost is, okay, but what are you gaining on the other side? Okay, what about all the people that previously would have dismissed you? They're like, holy shit, I really respect this person because they actually are somebody that they're not afraid to be who they are. Or all the people that were not paying attention, whose moral compass aligns very closely with what he's saying, that are like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. Yeah, I dig this. I'll go on X. I can't tell you how many of my friends that would have never went on X, they're all like, yo, X is awesome. One of my closest friends, Keith, he's been in the podcast before, a lifelong liberal, somebody who would have fit the current sort of, let's say, assumption that, hey, Elon's sort of pissing off a lot of Democrats and stuff. This person has been on X and he's like, this is awesome. It's great. It's crazy. It's chaotic. I mean, there's a lot of shit on there that's kind of wild, but it's fun. It's cool. It's a little bit. It's fun. It's not this PC thing that you talked about.
It's a little bit messy. And on top of that, I think it's important for, like, if people hold their cards super close to their chest, what that does is we are kept, here's a little bit of Jordan Peterson, is we're kind of kept sane by the communities of people around us and the feedback that we get from people. If we never really share true aspects of ourselves, those aspects of our personality never get into the limelight, they never get polished, they never get questioned. So if you share what your honest thoughts and feelings are on things, it's giving the people around you a chance to give feedback on who you are and the way you think about things. It's an opportunity for, to keep that person sane who's sharing. And it's an opportunity for the people around them to keep them in check.
And sometimes it's the flip, sometimes it's the crowd that is needed to have some pushback on them. And I think that's really more where we're at right now with the current, political environment, is that it's so crazy how, the really the mainstream media has pitted two sets of people kind of against one another in like this false dichotomy of ideas that are weird and really don't like, if you look at the full set of, if you're a Republican, you must believe ABC things. And if you're a Democrat, you must believe XYZ things. And then you're like, wait a second, X, Y, and Z don't really go together. What? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And A, B, and C, they don't seem like they make sense together either. And so, okay. And then when someone comes along and says that, then, both Team Blue and Team Red is like, you can't say that. These things totally make sense together. And so when you're in an environment like that, it does take a lot of courage because everyone is trying to push back against you and tell you to shut up. And there are these, groups of people who will want you to be canceled, and you've got to figure out how to stand up and say, no, like these things don't make sense. And it's really important to have those voices in the long arc of history to help rein things back in when they get a little bit off the rails in one direction or the other.
I have several thoughts on that. One is I'm thinking about community notes, and as I said, it's a little bit messy, and but what it does is, like, when Elon says something that's incorrect or a little bit bizarre, and community notes comes along and corrects it, it basically said, all right, nobody's above community fact checking here, and he leaves those up, and it's another way to disseminate truth, actually. When he says something incorrect and it gets corrected, the note's right there. And you can see that he's fallible, and you can actually see what the truth is. I forget what the second point I was going to make is. So if you want to move on to battery cells, we can. We got way off the...
It's all good. Actually, can we stick on this for 5 more? You guys want to talk about this for 5 more? Yeah, because I think it's interesting here. Here's a post that... from Tesla Goes Plaid, Mike on X at Tesla Goes Plaid. So, did you see Galley's post yesterday? With like his feedback about, I don't know if people have seen. Actually, Galley's coming on the podcast tomorrow. We're going to talk specifically about this at length, which I think is going to be a fascinating, probably cathartic podcast for some people that are very much they're unsure of what's happening. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy that conversation. But essentially, Galley's post was about, that a lot of people hate Elon Musk, and a lot of it is by the media, but some of his stubbornness is contributing to it. And then there was, things about how he knows people that are very upset with Elon and stuff. And sort of Galley's advice to Elon was, hey, like, it's okay to be political, but can you be a little bit more measured? Can you uplift the conversation a little bit so it's not as divisive? Maybe that was the thought process. Can you kind of return to the uniting voice that you had with that stuff, right? And then sort of my overarching reply to that was like, hey, the premise of it I like, which I think it has good feedback, which is like, hey, how can we uplift conversation so that we minimize divisiveness and we maximize talking about what actually matters. But I think the one thing that I really highlight is like, what's disappointing, at least to me, is that there's people out there that claim that they're very tolerant but are very intolerant of people like Elon, and that's very hypocritical, right? And I'll say that it's primarily from one side of the political spectrum, but anybody on either side can be subject to this. But I just find it interesting that the most tolerant self-claiming are the least tolerant when it comes to somebody like him, especially somebody like Elon that is solving for climate change and those big things that political party is very interested in. So that was sort of my overarching post. Is a long post. I don't want to go through it in here. But what I really want to highlight is the reply that I had from my post, where I was like highlighting that dynamic. And I would love to get y'all's reaction on this, because I think this sort of talks about, this is like a lose-lose situation for Elon, I think, based on our current political climate. I don't think that quite captures it. Farziness, it's not politics. A lot of people don't care that deeply if Elon is Democrat or Republican or makes political posts. Political posts might annoy them, but that's not why many boycott Elon companies. It's not an issue of politics. The people I know who sadly boycotted Tesla and Tesla stock and Tesla and bought other EVs did it because of Elon's perceived treatment of workers. My dogs. Seeming lack of empathy, stories of rage firings, how he handled claims of racism at Tesla, the things he said about trans people, and how he treats his own trans daughter. They see it as an ethical issue more than a political issue. And Kimball has talked about some of this, some of it in Walter's biography, and his own daughter spoke out pretty harshly recently. Of course, you and I know that the media and politicians do everything they can to contribute to many harsh narratives, some of which are blatant lies, and some of which may have some degree of merit but get overblown, and some might just be true. And yes, a lot of people have a problem with Elon supporting Trump, not because Trump is on the right, but because of who Trump is and what he's done to women and allegedly children, January 6th, felonies, etc. Their concern isn't that Trump is a Republican, is that they perceive Trump to be a terrible, unethical, immoral, untrustworthy human being. To these people, it's not political or left or right, it's that they perceive Elon as a massive narcissist villain, right or wrong. In their minds, the good he does not justify the harm he does, and because of that, some people fear him having power and don't want to support him. They see him creating a darker future rather than a brighter one. You and I can disagree with their view or where the balance lies, but that's what they really don't like. If Elon acted with more empathy and was supporting a Republican who is a decent human being, they might not like him leaning right, but that wouldn't affect people's buying decisions the way his perceived actions and treatment of others does. Just my observations from the Tesla boycotters I talked to in real life. It's not just politics, and I thank them for that insight, because I think the way he articulated it, I really enjoyed. Now, I think what's very interesting about it, though, is that it comes down, if you really think about it, in my opinion, it still comes down to politics, because that's how politics is framed in our current climate. It's existential. If you vote for this guy, you're voting for the worst person in the world. If you vote for this person is going to save everything. So it still ends up being political. And so by just allowing yourself to be seen by people in our current climate, some percentage of the population, especially those that are that make purchasing decisions driven by what they think is morality, but is really politics, they're just going to automatically place you into a box, right? And so it's like lose-lose. It's like, okay, so what? Let's say Elon cleans up his act. Let's say he has a broken act and he cleans up his act. I feel like they're still going to come after him anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree there. Yeah, it's the filter that they're using. They're getting everything through a filter of the media, and the media will take whatever they can and amplify it. It doesn't matter whether it's something small or big; they will pump it up as much as they possibly can. And there's so many people that have just been following mainstream media, corporate media, whatever you like to call it, for like 40 years now, and that's all they've been watching. And as that's gone off the cliff, they've gone off the cliff with it, and they can only see things now in those black and white terms. And whatever the media tells them about the way a person is, they still buy into it. Now, a lot of people have started to wake up, but I think, it's placing the blame on Elon is the wrong place to put it. The issue is with the filter. And I think what's happening is Elon is doing a lot of things and saying a lot of things that are controversial. And at some point, some people are having realizations. They go, did he really say that? Did he really mean that? And then they go on Twitter or they go read Walter Isaacson's book, and they see what the truth, and they go, oh, that's not what he meant, and that's not the type of person he is. And then they start working backwards and start questioning all the other narratives that they've been fed. So you may think that it's divisive and unhelpful for Elon to be like this, but it's waking a lot of people up. Because some people are going, that doesn't seem right. And they're looking into it and they're finding out it's not right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hilarious that the people think that this is just a moral, like, these are my moral beliefs. That's why, it's not because of my politics, it's my morals. And then it's like, wait a second, hold on, time out, pause. Let's do a Venn diagram of your morals and the morality of your political party. Is that a perfect circle? Maybe it's actually not morals. So anyways, as someone who's neither Republican or Democrat, when I listen through the list of all the reasons that people don't like him, it's like, that's the morality of a very, very specific set of people. And I mean, I do love the feedback, both from Galley and in here, but I think that what people may not realize, and I would include Galley in this, is that, they have very non-representative sample biases. That if you live in Seattle, if you live in San Francisco, if you live in New York, and you drive a Tesla, you're probably pretty wealthy. You're probably top 5% of wealth in the nation already. And you live inside of very, very, not only whatever, we'll set aside the media that you consume and how that plays into your filter bubble, but just the people that you're surrounded with day in and day out in your life, like that is not a representative sampling of the United States. And so I think people think that these views about Elon are much more blown out of proportion than they really are. Like, I don't think that 99.9% of Americans feel the way about Elon that what Galley is describing or what Mike here is describing. I think that is definitely a strong set of feelings that is common among a very specific set of people, but I don't think it generalizes.
And for every time that Elon says or does something like this, he's attracting people to him as well. Like around here, I think people like rural Ohio, I think people are like really like go Elon now. And I think he's attracting a lot of supporters on the other side of the political aisle.
But it's like my thesis is that it's the other side of the political aisle, but it's still like the say the 5 to 20% of that self-identified political group, right? It's still like 80 to 90% of the middle. They're like, best bang for your buck. Just give me best bang for your buck. Like if you take the Bud Light PR disaster, like let's if you use that as a proxy, let's say Elon's political takes and his willingness to say what he wants is similar to what happened with Bud Light. Okay, Bud Light was still a blip on the radar. Like if you like fast forward a year or two, and that was like a gigantic thing. And I'm not trying to correlate the two things. I'm just saying like when you think about the outrage that pertains to a specific brand or a specific thing that has happened, it's very much amplified by our current political climate, number one, that seeks to make enemies as quickly as possible so you can maximize tribalism on the other side, which gets voters out in droves, number one. And number two, I forget what point I was going to make. So, but that's what it is, And I think, but however, the flip side of that, I think the interesting point, which this is like, I think it has merit, but then the question becomes, what is the better long-term strategy? Is that, well, why are you doing things that will isolate your customers in the first place, right? And that's the sort of feedback I get from folks is like, why would you even do that when you know a percentage of your clientele likely bought your product based on, let's say, moral and political issues, aka I'm trying to save the planet, aka I'm trying to be green, aka I hate oil and gas because they're evil, right? Why are you taking political stances that are very obviously going to make those people feel like they've been backstabbed, let's say, right? And so that kind of goes back to your comment of like, hey, that would be a PC approach. That would be like don't rock the boat. You need to be a typical CEO. You just have to minimize damage, minimize risk, and maximize people liking your brand, right? But then the flip side of that is what you said is like, okay, but what about the amount of people that are not going to be very much like, whoa, I didn't even know this guy was like this. I didn't even know this brand existed. I actually could really like the transparency and how he's standing up for what he believes in. And then all of a sudden you have a significant number of people that are flocking to you and your brands that you basically had no access to for the last 10 years. And the thing that gets forgotten about this whole topic is that if you were to view the Elon Musk and Tesla story, let's say from 2012 to say 2021, okay, what was the predominant rhetoric around Tesla's brand? It's a green person, rich person's hippie vehicle, and those green bastards are not going to force me to buy an electric vehicle because they're taking government subsidies, and fuck those guys. it was very much politicized on the other side. You know what I'm saying? It's just the noise is coming from, I believe, is that Elon disrupted his OG, let's say part of his OG clientele that I think would have tied a lot of their morality and politics to that purchasing decision. And it wasn't necessarily a, let's just say, I bought this because I think it's the best product. It just, I bought this because I like what it represents.
Yeah. Like, an Apple product where you've got that nice little logo on there. It has this clean aesthetic, and people buy these products because they want to make a statement about their own identity. Like, this is the Simon Sinek thing that the Tesla vehicles really embodied that, I think, for a long time. And that was part of their core demographic early on. And it, I think those demographics just happened to line up nicely. But the thing that this was always going to be an inevitable clash of cultures as Tesla became more and more successful, because in order to transition the world to a sustainable transport future, that by definition means it's not only people who are liberal elites living on the coast who purchase your products. You have to convince 100% of Americans to buy an EV, not just 5%. And so as you kind of widen the tent and bring in more people to the product, then that does kind of create that culture clash that starts, because like you said, they began with that OG group who was really more people who were focused primarily on climate, and that was a very large part of the platform and the belief system of the left party.
Just we could talk about this topic for like the entire day, honestly, because it honestly is. I love what you said, Jordan, that it's like it's like almost like a proxy of. Let me pull up your post on X, because I thought it was very, very well put.
And while you're bringing that up, I think it's important to address the. We keep framing this in terms of like, you brought up. Some people say, why does Elon have to say this? Why can't he just focus on shipping the product? And it's because, well, he thinks society, and first and foremost, he considers himself a citizen, and he really likes the United States, and he wants the best for the world. And he's willing to forego the potential loss of some profits and making people angry to share his view on how we can make things better overall, regardless of whether it's a vehicle or the direction of the country. I'm not articulating this very well, but Twitter is a good example of this. He had a concern about free speech and the impact that X has had. The fact that he owns it now on the public discourse is amazing. I don't think we would be having a lot of the discussions we would have, or such great information about everything that's going on, if he wouldn't have put his thumb on the scale for his own belief system. So there are some things that are more important than profit, and he realizes that is probably the best way to put it.
I think the paradoxical thing that just happened here is that we wouldn't be having a discussion about how much people hate Elon unless Elon freed up the place as much as he did. Right. And that's sort of like, this is like the whole point is like, I don't think this would have been a topic of discussion because, and this is maybe why he bought Twitter, is because with some of the stuff he was sharing, what are the chances that he's being de-amplified or outright removed from social media platforms because he's spreading misinformation, spreading hate speech, so on and so forth. Like we would just be like, where did Elon Musk go? That would be the video topic, not, hey, this is why people hate Elon Musk.
And in a way, he could be protecting himself and Tesla by offering a free speech platform. Because if you get on the bad side of the media, et cetera, and there's no counterbalance to that, then people are just going to have a bad view of a person. At least now, there's an opportunity to hear both sides of things.
Real quick, let me read this post from you, and then we can move on into the thing that you make videos about. One of the greatest lessons and legacies that Elon will leave is that you shouldn't let boogeyman become too large in your mind. If there's powerful forces in the world that are bad actors, call them out. And if you're rich and powerful, you can buy their toys and turn them to good use. It's amazing the impact that new ownership of X has had on society. Yes, there's some negative aspects to Elon being political, but it's 99% positive. The good far, far outweighs the bad. And I thought that was very well put. And I think, on top of that, I think what's fascinating about this discussion is that, at least I don't want to put in words in your mouth, but I know this is how you guys think. In no way, shape, or form am I trying to justify anything, right? What I'm trying to do is trying to figure out how this guy operates and why he operates the way that he does, and what are the potential outcomes of those things, what the dynamics are from those things, and how I perceive the outcome long term, right? And so I don't think this is like us saying this is definitely how it should be. It's just three guys that are pretty like-minded discussing this very strange and probably uncomfortable dynamic for a lot of people in the most honest way possible that we know how.
And I would just say that, as far as people like this core group of customers, that they bought a Tesla because it made a social statement that this is what I believe is important and these are the values that I hold. And when you drive down the road, people automatically know the type of person that you are because you drive a Tesla. And now they feel like when they drive down the road, it makes a completely different statement. It doesn't say anything that correlates to who they are, and they want to sell their vehicle and they want to go buy a Rivian or a Lucid. Like, I honestly understand that, and I don't fault them for that. And I think Rivian and Lucid could really use the help. And Teslas are such great products that it's okay for them to move on and be, early adopters of other EV companies that need support. I don't hold any ill will against them. I disagree with them that, on some of the purchase, like the reasons to make a purchasing decision, but that's fine. Like I'm really glad that they did support Tesla early and often, because I was not in a position to purchase the car until just this year for the first time. And I'm glad that people who had that ability to do that did that early. And like, I just want to thank them for buying the car in the first place. Like, just because someone is no longer a Tesla customer doesn't mean that the support that they've given the company wasn't meaningful and important. And so I think that is also, part of the discussion. And just to bring it back to what Gally said, and I do hope that Elon can find a way to be a little bit more unifying in the way that he discusses some of these things. Like, there's some value in the trolling strategy, but it is something that I just wish that we could come together more. I think that we've got some really, really major issues to face over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I think most of the really significant ones aren't the ones that get much airtime. And so I hope that we can figure out how to talk about those things more and be unified around how we solve those things, and be a little bit less distracted by some of the things that the legacy media would like us to be distracted by that really are kind of non-issues. And I think that Elon does kind of get sucked into some of those rabbit holes a little bit, maybe more so than is constructive.
And you do everything yourself, all the editing, all the research. It's like a one-man show, right?
Yeah.
Have you considered getting help?
I have, but it doesn't work out that well because the
ROI doesn't make sense.
I'm so damned anal. It's like, I'm so particular about things, and what it does is it part of it is the fact that I'm very particular about things, but I think more so with each, like when I record audio, it gives me another chance to polish things up. When I edit the script, when I pull the video together, each one of those steps allows me to polish and refine what I'm saying so I can get across exactly what I want to. And then if I involve other people in that, the quality just isn't as high. And part of the reason why I make these videos is so I can absorb the information and remember it and make sure that my thinking is clear. So all those steps help solidify the things and solidify my thinking. Yeah.
It's funny because I've spoken with Stephen Mark Ryan about the same exact thing. And I asked him, like, have you ever considered like getting help? And he said the same exact thing.
Oh.
I fear that, he fears that his quality will not be up to par to his standard, or like it just will not be exactly what he's looking for, And it seems like it's and like with Hans, for example, so Hans and I edit our videos together. And one of the things that Hans was very peculiar on was when he was editing the podcast, he wanted to analyze every minute, right? And really go through a fine-tooth comb. And I work the opposite way. I'm like, just fucking let it out. I don't give a fuck. Just get it out there, out in the streets. and see how people are. It's interesting.
I think mine is
just
more ADHD than OCD. Like as soon as I move from one,
I thought it was just an autistic thing.
Yes, definitely. Like I just get distracted. I'm like, oh, listening to the conversation. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. And then I'm just like, for 5 minutes, I'm listening to it. And I'm like, oh shit, I need to go do the next cut.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's kind of like what I do on Twitter, which is I look at what people are saying and I think about it. Well, I also do the same thing when I'm putting information out there. So for me, it's very much, I feel like I'm going to lose my edge. I'm going to lose my grip if I don't spend a lot of time refining my thinking. And it's often in those moments when I'm refining my thinking, or I've gone it over 100 times, where something erupts and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. It's like I have to grind through an idea a certain number of times, and then a mushroom pops up.
Yeah. But you're doing that through and this is so fascinating. Like you're doing that through your editing and typical process of crafting a video, right? Or you're doing that before you even get there. This is like part of the process of crafting the video, like scripting, and like you're reading through the script, you're putting it down on paper, you're doing you're voicing it, you're editing it, and as you're going through it and finding the imagery, you're like, holy shit, okay, so like this makes sense. I got to add this or remove this and whatever. Is that like how your process looks like roughly?
What I do is, like, when I'm doing videos, I'm learning other things. And what I do is, like, when I come across a topic and it's like, well, I don't have enough time to cover that right now, but I do want to explore it a little bit. And while I'm on this golden thread, I'm going to pursue it. So I'm often, when I'm researching a video, I'm doing deep dives into multiple things. And what I do is with those extra bits, I take that and I put it into little files and folders for future videos. And then when I have enough information on a topic, it's like, ooh, this one feels like it's getting ripe. It's time to polish this up and turn it into a video. And then I really start grinding on it. But it's, and this is a good analogy for something we might talk about later, but it's kind of like training compute for full self-driving. The more data that you use, the more comparisons that you have, and the more information you can have to get an understanding of what's relevant and what's not. I forget where I was going with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, so it's like the end-to-end process you're going through, all of it generates some sort of value, either near term or long term, right? So every single bit of like effort you put into it, at some point that will get used, like a significant percentage of it, right? Yeah. Regardless. Yeah.
So what I was going to say, it's like compute cycles for processing all this data for full self-driving. The more compute that you apply to something, the more what's relevant starts to emerge. So you have this combination of a lot of information and a lot of compute, and what that does as you polish and refine ideas, it makes it clear what's relevant. And that's kind of what I see what's like a corollary between, or an analog between what I do and what I see them doing with this training on full self-driving. Is the more you understand something, the more you think about it, the more information you have, the more it becomes clear what's important and what's not. And that's how they can compress these models and put it into, that's why these models keep getting better and better with smaller
parameter counts and stuff.
Yeah. So they get more efficient over time because you've applied more thinking and more data to it. And that's kind of like what I'm doing when I'm processing my videos is if the longer I think about something, the more clear it becomes to me. And you can start saying how you should weight different ideas. And yeah. I think I'm getting repetitive now.
Yeah. But. I mean, that's where Elon was talking about, making the full self-driving models. The thing that's hard is making them high signal to noise ratio, that it's easy to increase the parameter count, but it's hard to make them higher signal to noise ratio. And that's what it takes more compute or more data or more compute and more time and more data to do that, to where you can get the same performance out of a bigger or out of a smaller model that you could before with a bigger model. It's
how efficient you can compress reality. So the more compute you apply to it, the more data you have to find out what's relevant. the more efficient it'll be.
And so, and you know how I think about that in human terms. So if I apply that to content creation, that what we just talked about, I describe that as the artistic process. It's like less science and more art, right? Because it's like you're consuming all this information. And I don't know if you agree with this, but then there's something like you said, like, aha, now I feel like I'm getting somewhere. There's enough here for a video, right? But it's like, for me, it's like, I don't know how to create a process to get to that point. All that is like, I'm just consuming as much information as I can. And then my brain just kind of puts it together. It's like, yo, video concept, here's the flow, go into it. And for me, it's like, okay, that's just the artistic process. But if we apply it to the FSD sort of thing that we just talked about, if we try to like draw a parallel to it, Tesla is essentially figuring out the artistic process of a car driving itself, but they're using science and physics and, you know, neural networks and programming and code and artificial intelligence so how can it not be creative, right? Like that's kind of like the conclusion I'm reaching. In a way, self-driving is a very creative type of problem that Tesla is looking to solve using artificial intelligence. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's fucking crazy. It's like, so this is the nerdiest thing of all time. It's so great. Like they've literally figured out how to make an artistic process, like Midjourney, for example. Like I would say Midjourney is an artistic sort of artificial intelligence solution because it's creating art, right? I don't care like if people say, well, there's not Van Gogh or whatever. I'm like, dude, but look at it. It looks beautiful. It's art, right? I feel like self-driving falls in the same. Just us talking about this is just crazy how much similarity there is between like content creation and self-driving.
Yeah, they're working on, they're trying to replicate the human mind. And that's why I think Elon said intelligence is the ability to compress reality. Because he's not just talking about intelligence, synthetic intelligence, he's talking about human intelligence as well. It's exactly what we do. We try to compress reality. And the better you are at compressing reality, I would assume the better you are at making content for people. You just consume, and you can boil things down for people. And also, in that process of consumption and thinking, little ideas will pop out just randomly, unexpectedly, and you can't predict it. And I see that when you're doing posts on Twitter as well. I can see that these little ideas are cropping up for you, and you just need to get them out.
Yeah. That's literally, my shit posting is actually part of my artistic process. Yeah. Like, it's like, and I know people that follow are like, wow, you're kind of psycho. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't explicitly say, hey, I'm actually using this to try to find where I need to go with a certain topic, be it, Tesla, non-Tesla, political, non-political. And I use the feedback that I get from X and the people on there to help me find the right path. And then you're 1,000% right. You figured me out, Jordan. And I've been exposed.
Yeah. And then, no, I can see your mind working away when you do these posts. And I can also see, and one thing that people don't appreciate, when people try to put you in a box on Twitter, like, oh, you can't talk about that. Well, you don't know where these ideas are going to intersect. The more ideas you can expose yourself to, the more likely it is that something's going to emerge that's unexpected. It's kind of like when I was in acting classes. What we'd often do is we'd try to take two ideas that were so far apart, they didn't seem like they belonged together. And you try to overlay them together within some sort of skit. And that's when you had the most fun and the most creativity. It's just mashing things together and see what pops out.
Nailed it. Yeah. Like being open and unafraid to tackle any subject is by far the best way to optimize for the best possible type of content if you're using that for your creative process to figure out what you should do. Right? It's like you nailed it. Don't put yourself in a box. It's counterintuitive, but it makes total sense because people are like, well, if you broaden yourself out, you're gonna make your audience feel a certain way. You're gonna start going down the wrong path, blah blah blah. And yes, a certain percentage of my audience will feel like they're being sort of like, oh, I came to Farzad for Jordan for a specific topic or Hans, and now he's going this direction that's very offensive. But in reality, if we don't go through a discovery process of trying to just play around with ideas, our content will become stale so quickly. And the bigger thing is that, at least for me, I don't know if this applies to you guys too, I will get burned the fuck out. I will hate it. I will hate doing what I'm doing. And so if I don't have a variety of ideas that are challenging and weird in a way, they're uncomfortable, it's not interesting, you know? And it's almost like seeking that discomfort is the best way to make yourself into the best possible content creator, because it like forces you to see things from perspectives that you otherwise wouldn't have thought you should be looking at. You know what I'm saying? So there's so much that goes into it that so many people have no idea when it comes to what we do. It's wild. It's so fun.
Anybody who makes content, since I started making content, I respect. Even if I don't like what they're doing, I hate their content. It's like, well, I respect that you're putting in the work to do it every day because I know what you're going through. Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Go ahead.
It does get monotonous if you don't inject something fresh.
1000%.
Was Hans going to say something? Because there's something I was going to.
No, you have the orange chair. You go.
I use this chair specially because I have my blue chair that I usually sit in, but I wanted to splash of color. So
no wonder you were like, "Hey."
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna stop it right here. Actually, I'm gonna keep recording. Maybe there's some. Hans has been doing outtakes on the podcast,
You've done
and
some. Well.
I've done some too. Yeah, but you sort of were the inspiration, and with David Carbut, who's he's sort of our media guy, I call him. He does a lot of our production and stuff for our stuff. We left him a little Easter egg in one of the outtakes for one of the podcasts that we did. And he still hasn't found it because they're so long. He's got to go all the way to the end. And he's been on a lot of holiday because he's from the UK. So the son of a bitch during the summer, he basically doesn't do shit. He just travels all the time. Let's see if you watch this, David. Fuck you. How about that? Huh? Holiday, tea, crumpet. Asshole. I'm so jealous.
I can never do those accents.
I can't either. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, I'm pretty well cooked. There's a few spots there where I was like, oh well, you know how it is when sometimes you're talking and it feels it's like it's almost like you're watching yourself talk and you're like, am I making sense? Do I look like an idiot? I probably
made sense the whole time.
Oh,
I think what's the challenge with these topics is that it's just so there's a lot of brain cycles that you have to go through as you talk, right? Because you got to pull this data, you got to put it together, and so like I'm exhausted. Like this 2-hour conversation is exhausting. It really is exhausting, but it's very stimulating because I get to listen back to it tomorrow and actually like be like, okay, so what did we actually talk about? For those that are watching, like we don't really know what we're saying as we're saying it.
No, that's true because you're so focused on what you're going to say next and processing the conversation as it works that it's like your memory turns off. So when you go watch it, like you remember bits and pieces, but it's like it's often not how you remember it was from the it's not quite how you remember it until you watch it and you're like, I thought I looked like a moron there, but I sound pretty smart.
And you look damn good saying it too, Jordan.
Or the opposite. Like, I thought I said something profound and I sounded like a dick.
No, not with you.
Yeah.
Happens to me a lot.
It always is interesting, like you said. Yeah, the difference in the real time experience of the conversation, and then listening back to it, whether it's on an edit or even just listening back to it later. Like the things that you missed the first time around will pop out at you, or things you're like, I thought they were saying this, and I was totally like, that's not what they were saying at all, and I totally misread them or misrepresented them or whatever, misunderstood, and so it can be both fun and humbling at the same time.
Yeah, it's great. Very valuable in the end.
But you guys are doing like that interview with what was the guy that you interviewed that was an expert on the Chinese supply chain?
Michael Dunn.
That was fucking excellent. Like that was really, really excellent piece of content because it's like, you have all these assumptions about the way the world works and your investment thesis in Tesla, and your guy comes on like that and you're just lobbing him balls. He's going crack.
Yeah.
Getting all those out of the park and going, oh, that's what I thought. That was my assumption. It's great to see somebody agree with you.
Yeah.
and confirm your suspicions. Somebody that has, a lot of experience. Because
especially when you've had a thesis for as long as we have.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of assumptions about things like that, and it was so good to see him confirm all of that. And it was like him, like, well, obviously, it was like, and this is a guy with a lot of experience, just going, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you got that right. You're on the right track, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
Well, and
It's
especially
crazy.
having him both have all that experience, but also coming from the enemy camp of GM and still having the perspective that he has. He's like, he's a defector to the light side now. He came from
Yeah.
the dark side of the force to join us.
yeah. And I know exactly where I was when I was listening to that conversation. I was in Manila, and like at an Airbnb, kind of like looking down at the people swimming in the pool, and it was just like, yeah, for some reason I remember that moment listening to that, going, this is a really fucking good interview. And I'm like
Nice.
sitting here on vacation watching it, watching and listening to it.
That's awesome.
So-
Well, that's great to hear from you, because your opinion matters a lot. So that's fucking awesome. That makes
Well,
me, yeah.
I think the same of you guys. Like, I was telling Hans, he's got a mind like an elephant. Like, there's so many things that you know about, and it's like, Jesus, how do you, like, I have to grind away on this. I'm not saying that you don't, but like, I actually have to make videos and research things for weeks, and I have to just kind of cram this shit into my brain because like I don't have a good memory for things, and the only way I can remember it is if I make the videos. Otherwise, it just bloop, like I'm like a sieve.
Yeah.
But it's so cool to see like you remember so much from so many different sources of content on so many different topics. It's cool.
Well, you do such a good job with the technical content. Like, I was trying to read that stupid patent just literally yesterday, today, that SETI Park, put out about how they're combining the training, they're sourcing real world examples of driving scenarios, and they're trying to like beef that up with simulation. And I'm like sitting there trying to parse all this stuff. I'm like, God, I fucking hate technical literature. I'm out of here. I'm going to go back and listen to some podcasts and then, just randomly spew shit out of my mouth, and I'll have a lot more fun.
Yeah, well, that's like if I didn't have my channel and I wasn't an expectation for me to explain this, I wouldn't read all through all these fucking patents and all this bullshit.
Yeah.
But when there's an expectation of 120,000 people, it provides some motivation. It's like, all right, I have a mission, I have a duty, and
For sure.
makes it worthwhile for me. And then Farzad, yeah, with your like all the ideas, yeah, like a lot of times like that motherfucker, he got to that idea faster than I did. Like, or you thought about something and you articulate it just a little bit better than I could, or you took an idea that I was developing and working on and you put it out on Twitter. It's like, God damn it, it's like neck and neck a lot of times when the way that I see your thinking develop on things, and it's so good to read what you're thinking because it often puts a cherry on top of what I was thinking, or it helps further development, or it aligns exactly with the way that I'm thinking. So yeah, it's fun to watch you post on Twitter because it's it's cathartic and you do a good job with it.
Well,
That's
I appreciate
also-
that, man.
It's
I mean,
also
I think
like-
I mean, a lot of like, it's that's the beauty of where we live now. It's like there's so many ideas, there's so many pieces of content, there's so many pieces of literature that we're all sharing with each other, And so it's almost like we're all feeding off of each other. That's why this whole community thing is so sick. It's so awesome. It's because it's a lot of like, I just think there's a lot of intellectual people in this community who are really try to work from a ground level truth perspective, really try to root cause analyze everything, thinking from first principles, taking a scientific approach. And they're not afraid to put their thoughts out there for people to read. Like, one of the arguments I would make is like, for like your work, Jordan, like before the internet, you still can. You're just choosing to put it out there for the public to read. There's no reason why Jordan Gisagi shouldn't be a research firm where he charges millions of dollars per year to access your research. But you choose to put it out there for people to read. And that's the beauty of the time we live now, especially with this Tesla story, is that it's cutting edge technology that happens to be bundled in this public company with this psycho guy at the helm leading the whole thing. But the entire ecosystem that has arisen around it is like open source. in a way, like a lot of us monetize through advertisements on YouTube, which more power to everybody. Like your time is not free. You should be compensated for it. I've become a very big believer in that as the more I've done it, because it takes so much fucking effort to put all this together. But it's just a click away for people. You just click it and then you can consume that information. And a lot of what I work on is other literature or content or ideas that I've read from other people. And then sort of where the value of my brain comes from is how I package that and bring it forward, and like that's what you do for the technical stuff. And that's what Hans does for technical and like,
how long have
sort
we
of
been
like
doing this together?
Yeah. For like, a couple months now. How long have we been doing this? Like for the beginning of the year, right?
Yeah. I think it was like
6-7 months.
January-ish, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why I brought Hans like to do the podcast with me is like Hans is the perfect person I need to be able to bounce off ideas with, and also bring a dimension to the conversation that I can't bring, that I benefit from, right? And so that's why we do this podcast together, because he'll ask questions that I'll never think of, and I'll ask questions that he never thinks of. And then our guests will say things, and then we're both absorbing in a different way, and then we both share our, like, these are our neural nets are bringing different types of value around the same kind of like, but at the same time, and it's like that's the beauty of where we live today. Like something like this is possible, and it makes me feel so proud and happy that it's actually valuable to people. That's the coolest part of this whole thing. Like people legitimately enjoy what we do, and that's unbelievable. It's so cool. Thank you, everybody. Truly, I truly mean it.
Yeah, and you guys, it's a good combination with the two of you, because you can see you're following similar threads, but you're looking at it from a slightly different angle. So I don't see you guys usually stepping on each other's toes. You're usually, you're following the same path, but looking at it from different angles. So it's, the combination of you two is good. And in terms of, I feel like there's so many nodes to the neural network that is the Tesla community, and we're just part of that. We're people who have happened into a position where
a small part of it.
Yeah, a small part of it where we're obsessed, insane people who constantly hoovering up all the information and opinions that we can, and looking at what we think about that and then regurgitating it. There's some first principles sources of information in the community. Some of that is technical, but some of those ideas come from people like you, where you just like, you absorb so much information that a new idea pops out. We're kind of coming full circle here into the conversation from earlier. But I do feel like we are neurons in a big network, and we're bouncing things off of each other. But we just happen to be in a position where, much like a neural network places weights on certain things, or certain neurons become more important and communicate more, that's kind of where we've happened into. We just have... Our neurons are the right shape in order to consume and regurgitate information back into the community. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Okay.
I mean, and the packaging of the information and how it's conveyed and how it's put on screen too, just by having a face on the screen and knowing how to introduce concepts. Like this is like the part of the art that gets lost, because I think there's a lot of people out there that, look at what we do and they say, well, that's what you do. You just take a bunch of information, you just put it out there for people to see. Like, okay, yes, at the core, that's a lot of what happens, but that's literally everything. That's how everything works. It's the people that are very successful at it is how they present that information so that it's absorbable by the audience that you're trying to reach, And as this story grows, and this story becomes like the thing that I've been thinking a lot recently is the inevitability of Elon Musk becoming the world's first trillionaire, and what are the implications of that from a societal perspective. I don't see anybody talking about that. That's a huge fucking deal. Because what does that imply? Tesla is gigantic. SpaceX is gigantic. Neuralink's probably going crazy. X is gigantic. XAI is gigantic. We have AGI in some form. We have self-driving cars. We have Starship going crazy. Oh, and by the way, we have Essential Force individual that's a trillionaire that's going to be attacked by multiple governments just because he's a trillionaire. What does that mean to the whole story arc of the whole? Like, it's like you have this crazy future that's about to, and then, like in the periphery, what are those technologies doing to society? How is that changing work? How is that changing transportation? There's just so much that's about to happen.
It's like a sci-fi novel or a sci-fi movie.
It is.
There's a super corporation or a super genius that influences society in the future. Or if you want to look at it from like a historical perspective, Elon's the type of person, like he may end up being the most important person in human history outside of like Jesus and Cyrus the Great or people like that. People that come along like once in 1,000 years.
Yeah. Genghis Khan.
Where they completely change the shape of society. And that's Elon.
Yeah, and I think where people like, you know, and this is the fascinating thing about this, because some people view that through a lens of for the worse, and some people view it for the better. And this is why I love doing what I do, is because it's the exploring how society is perceiving that for the next 2 decades is the fun part of this whole thing, both from a technical aspect, technological aspect, and a societal aspect, you know?
Yeah, the crazy thing about that is that, you know, we've never been in a position in all of human history where human society was connected by the ability to share information the way that the internet has enabled. Yeah. So, you know, like there's letters and writing about Alexander the Great, or Genghis Khan, or, you know, all of these different major historical figures. But think about what it would have been like to be a person living in that time. And what would your ability be to understand the world events that are going on around you if you are not like just happen to be one of the lucky people that's in the high court of whatever government, like to where you actually have access to that information. And so to be able to, as like a normal, like random person who doesn't live in Washington or Silicon Valley or any of these places, be able to analyze like and feel like you can actually, if you will put in the work, get to the point where you can have a good understanding of what's going on and then be connected to this, not only taking in information, but now you can participate in a conversation with another global network of people like we've been talking about that understand this information as best they can and bounce all these perspectives off of one another. Like, I honestly think, so I posted a little bit of a trolley post the other day, like, how does it feel to be living 31 years after the singularity? Like, I think that Mark Andreessen's invention of the internet browser is the beginning of the singularity. Like, I don't think that you can anticipate or predict the changes to society that occur after the invention of the browser. Like, you know, we expected flying cars. We never expected internet. Like, there were a few individuals who kind of understood that, but, you know, almost no one. And everything about modern society that has radically transformed over the last 30 years has done so with the internet as a core piece of the backbone that made it possible. Like, if there's no internet, there is a very muted growth of, you know, the functionality of computers. You certainly don't get mobile technology. Like, you don't get iPhones, you don't get social media. Like, all of these things that shape what modern society looks like are all built on the back of the internet. And so, you know, to combine all that and bring it back to what we're talking about, now we can process this. Like, the entire world has access to this, roughly the same information, and can process all this information in real time. Like, I think that what humanity with internet is an entirely different emergent evolutionary being than humanity without internet.
And how does artificial intelligence accelerate that? The processing and the ingesting and the analyzing and the parsing and sort of like the honing in on the things you should be paying attention or not, how it helps you ask the right questions. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like if humans are a giant neural network, the AI is almost like another layer to that. Kind of like there's our reptile brain and there's our prefrontal cortex and things like that. It's almost like for humanity, that's what AI is. It's plugged into all that. It is an evolution of us because it's produced from all of our data. And
the internet is the primal brain, and then the AI is the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know exactly how to think about it. I'm just kind of riffing here, but
I think that's correct. It sounds right. Yeah.
And then,
I'm thinking it's more of a transport layer. Like it's more of the interconnections between neurons than it is the neurons or like an addition of layers of neurons. But maybe it is because it's such a,
it's an accelerant.
It can be a filter. It can be an accelerant. It can be a modulating function. And honestly, we just don't really know what it is going to shape up to be. Like we have kind of the seeds of what it is, but like the next 10 years are going to be nuts.
Yeah.
And I think signal to noise ratio is so hugely important, and the search for truth is so hugely important. This is another one of those areas, or obsessing about Elon. This is another area where he's so important. Is like you have to have freedom of speech, free communication, things like that, and this is why X is so important. Because if that data stream gets polluted, then anything that emerges beyond that is going to be polluted as well. And beyond what Elon's doing at X, there's also this broader kind of cultural revolution. I don't like that term because it's been used in other ways, but the efficiency and the signal to noise ratio that he creates in his companies and the clarity of purpose, that's spreading, I feel like. It's spread through the Tesla community, it's spread through all the organizations, and I hope what he's putting in place at Tesla and his companies will spread to other places, because it's a cultural phenomenon, what he's done with his organizations with signal to noise ratio, and now he's doing it at a societal level with Twitter.
And how he's building Grok with the idea of we need a tool to just tell us ground truth is the accelerant for people to be able to start. Because the best way to start in the way he starts his companies is from first principles. The best way to start from first principles is by starting with truth. Like what are the core truths about what's happening, right? And it's some sort of tool set that helps you identify what those core truths are, so you can start building up. But by then, who needs humans when the AI can just do it himself, right? Or herself, or itself, whatever, Anyway, I'm about to take this and I'm going to end it. I got to pee so bad. I'm going to end recording here. All right.